I'm really excited about this topic, designing your user's learning experience. So I'll tell you a bit about what that is, but first, a little about me for those who don't know who I am. My name is Nitya Shekar. I work on the learning and development team here at AppNexus, and I've been at AppNexus almost 4 years now, which in AppNexus terms is a little bit of a long time. There are a few a little longer than me, like Adam. But it's been amazing to see the company change and transition. And now in my work in learning and development, a big part of what I do, of course, as the name implies, is to help people learn and develop. And that is designing and developing training programs, courses, workshops, all kinds of learning opportunities for people at AppNexus, regardless of team, of tier, function, or office. The goal is for everyone to be learning. So then what am I doing here? Well, my goals for you guys today are twofold, really. One is to tell you a little bit about my design process when it comes to designing a learning program or a workshop of some kind. But then a little bit broader than that, to help you apply some of the concepts we cover to your own design work. So specifically, we're going to cover what it means conceptually to be user-centered and performance-based when designing learning. User-centered and performance-based are going to be our two guiding principles. We'll talk about what those are and how you can actually use them. Now, in true learning and development fashion, for anyone who has participated in my programs, you should have a one-pager somewhere near you. Hopefully it's on your seat, thanks to the UX team's help. You guys have a one-pager and a pen. No experience with me is complete without a participant guide and the ability to take notes. So feel free to jot down anything you like in this presentation on there. Starting now. The first thing I want you guys to think about and jot down is think of one design project that you're going to have to do in the coming year. Now, by the way, this could take many different forms. It could be a program you have to write for certain users. It could be an onboarding plan you have to design for new hires that are joining your team. It could be a social or team building event that you have to organize. It could be a new product feature you're designing, a new back-end tool that you're rolling out to internal AppNexus users, whatever it may be. Just something you have to design that has at least one user. And go ahead and jot that down, and we'll keep referring back to that example throughout this little talk. All right. So as I said earlier, our guiding principles today are going to be user-centered and performance-based. So let me tell you a little bit about what that means. User-centered is a little bit what it sounds like. The focus is on the user. And this is a concept I use very directly in my work. I call it learner-centered, but it's the same idea. It's this idea that when we're designing learning, the focus should really be on the user, their perceptions, their learning styles, their experience and prior knowledge, their motivation level, what's going on with them, their needs and concerns and fears, as opposed to designer-centered, which is, what do I want to come here and tell you? What do I know? What do I think is important to say up here? That's the designer-centered view, and we want to take that shift over to the user. So in this particular example, here you see Professor Warren in a Harvard Law School classroom. If she were designer-centered, she would get up there and say what she thinks is interesting on that particular day. But instead we want to be user-centered, which is, what do these people in this classroom, these learners, these users need to know? It's really shifting from what's their situation and how can I cater to that. And then the second guiding principle, as I said, is performance-based. Performance-based you can contrast with content-based. Performance-based is around what to do, what do they have to do, how to do something versus what to know. Now, I know that may sound a little strange coming from someone in the learning and development field, because I'm the first to tell you that learning for the sake of learning without any kind of end purpose, just love of learning should be enough. And I happen to agree, I love that. But when we're in the design field, it really should be about performance. What should they be able to do? What should they be able to accomplish or achieve with what you're telling them? Not just what's nice to know. If you're content-based, that content's just going to feel like a ton of bricks being hurled at them. No one's going to know what to do with it. It's just going to feel like a lot of stuff coming at them. But if you make it performance-based, they'll know what to do. They'll really understand what's that behavioral change that needs to be created as a result of this content. So again, user-centered and performance-based. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive in. And what I'm going to do is take you guys through my learning design process, and we'll use these two principles, user-centered and performance-based, throughout it. Again, the goal for you is to try and think about how you can use some of these to guide your own design moving forward. The step one of this design process is analyzing your user base, what I'm calling analyzing your user base. Some other ways to think about this step one are the research and discovery phase, user research. In the learning field, we also call it a needs assessment or a needs analysis. The idea behind analyzing your user base is basically that you don't want to dive in and start designing right away, because that would be designer-centered. You're going in based on your own biases, your own assumptions, what you think is useful. As Dr. Kolarek said earlier, a lot of products enter the market. I'm sure you can think of some where it's like, who's going to use this? Who thought of this? No one's actually going to use this. Did they talk to anybody about this? And you don't know where it comes from. And some of that is about not doing a thorough analysis of the user base. So in my field in learning and development, what this involves is a needs assessment in the form of interviews. And when I do a needs assessment, I look at my population, which is AppNexus. My clients are the internal learners of AppNexus. And what I do is a series of interviews looking at the cross-section of the company. And the goal is to get a really representative sample of everyone who works here and go out and learn. If you're scratching your head as a designer thinking, how do I know what people want? How do I know what people are going to use? Well, analyzing your user base by looking at a cross-section of that user base is the best way to understand what is useful and actually design what is useful. So when I do it, my ultimate goal is, well, what do AppNexians want to learn? What do people want to learn here? But also, what should they be learning? Where are the gaps? So I take a pretty methodical approach. I figure out how to build this core, this cross-sectional representative sample. And it's pretty thorough. I find people across functions, so that engineering, sales, services, people, legal, finance, everybody's represented. It's also across tiers, so that you have more entry-level, middle managers, as well as executives represented. Of course, across offices is equally important, so that it's not New York-centric, but that we're looking at global offices and what everyone around the world needs. And finally, also looking at tenure. So there are people who have been at AppNexus for a long time, some long-timers like Adam and myself at this point, but also newer hires. So we also want to know, what do people who have been here a long time have to say about the learning needs here, as well as people who are new and bring a fresh perspective. So again, those aspects I look at across tiers, functions, tenure, offices, and I put together this core sample of people and interview them. I ask them those questions. I go out and learn what people need to learn here. Some of those questions you can adapt to your own user research or discovery process, such as, what's going on here? Tell me what the pulse is. Some of the specific questions I ask include, how are people on your team or in your function or in your group learning today? What are people doing to learn? How much of that is on the job versus outside AppNexus? Perhaps they're taking other courses. And what's missing? Where are the gaps in development? What do people need to learn? What skills do they need to develop that they don't have today? And what's standing in the way of that right now? Is it time? Perhaps it's a bandwidth issue. Is it budget? Is it buy-in? What's going on? What's standing in the way for you? And how can learning and development help? Can we build courses or workshops, which we're always happy to do? Or is it more that we want to partner with you to bring someone externally who's an expert on this who can help your team with it? What format is that going to take? And so it's a very in-depth, involved process, again, with the goal being to come out of it with a whole lot of real information about the user base and what's going to be useful to them. I then synthesize that. Of course, I share it with my manager and my team and other relevant stakeholders, and I design off of that. So it's often kind of funny because I'm a huge nerd about this stuff. I'll go and say, oh, we really need to have a course on, on empathy, and we really want to have a course on emotional intelligence, and I can have a million ideas in my head. Some of them might be pretty good ideas, but it doesn't matter. I design off of what I get from this discovery process so that I'm catering to what the learners at AppNexus actually need. I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, if you're interviewing such a huge cross-section of the company across so many functions and offices, isn't everybody going to tell you something slightly different? And that's true. Of course, I'm looking for trends. I'm trying to find patterns that I can then draw off of and design from. But every group is going to have different needs. The engineering portion of my user base may give me some feedback. The sales side may give me a different kind of set of gaps or needs that they want me to address. Similarly, London, Paris, Singapore may be telling me different things than Portland or Seattle. So how do you please everyone? Well, you can't please everyone because we all have limitations. As a designer, you're limited by your own time, bandwidth, your own resources, budget, whatever it may be. So given those limitations, it's important to just recognize those limitations and optimize for what I'm calling the maximum overall positive impact. The maximum overall positive impact. That is to say that I take all the data I gather from this discovery process and think, well, what can I prioritize such that I'm going to have the maximum overall impact for the most number of people, that's quantity-wise, but also quality-wise, what's going to really resonate with the most people. So that is analyze your user base. Let's jump to step 2 now of this process, which is know your user. Know your user. For most of you, whatever design project you're working on, whatever it is you have to put together, your user is probably an adult. Now, I'm just assuming here. Now, the adult learner, the adult user, is a very particular kind of user, and it's not something we stop and think about every day. I'm contrasting that with children, child learners or child users, who fundamentally learn differently. So what I want to walk you guys through here briefly under Know Your User are 3 of many adult learning principles that will help you understand who your user is a little bit better and tailor what you're doing, tailor what you're building and designing to be sure that you're speaking to the adult in the way that they want to be spoken to. Adult learning, by the way, is a huge field, and I know that Dr. Clark, who is just here, she's a psychologist, I'm sure, knows this in a great amount of depth, and it's something I like to talk about informally as well. But here I'll just give you a snapshot of some of the most relevant 3 that you can use. First one here is readiness. Readiness. So to help you understand what readiness is, I'll give you a quick little example. If you can imagine yourself in a bar with some friends on Friday night, maybe it's happy hour, and you've asked the bartender to create a special colorful cocktail for your friend, like, hey, why don't you make this? They're really going to like it. And the bartender makes something fantastic and says, hey, here you go, and is about to pour it from the little cocktail shaker into your friend's glass, and your friend puts their hand over the glass, just like that. And the bartender's pouring, and of course, you can imagine none of that is going into the glass. It's spilling everywhere, it's getting all over your friend's hand, all over the table, but it's not going into the glass. This is what we mean by readiness. That's an analogy to show you that readiness means having that open mind, being ready to learn, being ready to interact with whatever information you're giving somebody. It's very, very important. The thing with adult learners is that they bring their own priorities and attitudes to any new situation. Any new learning situation, certainly. Some of these priorities and attitudes predispose them to be interested. Some of them predispose them to be not interested and closed off. And really, the thing to know about adult learners is they will interact with that information or with the system or with your program if they choose to, if they're ready to. So how do you pry your friend's hand off the glass there? How do you open an adult learner's mind and make them ready to interact? Well, I'll tell you what I do. It's called WIFM, so what's in it for me. The what's in it for me, or the rationale, the why, is something that is a critical part of every piece of learning that I design. No piece of learning I design is complete without it. What's the point here? How are you going to use it? How is this going to benefit you? I basically start every course off with it. If you've taken the Pro Series with me, Should I'm a Manager, a management training, all of them have this in common, in that right at the beginning, it's important to communicate to that adult user, why are you even here? How are you going to use it? These can include the rationale, as I said, the why are we here, as well as the performance objective. Remember we said earlier that one of our guiding principles is being performance-based. Not just, here's a lot of content I'm going to throw at you for 3 hours, but here's what you're going to do with it when you leave. In Training for Mindfulness, which is a Pro Series course I do right here in the amazing Razzle Dazzle, for example, I talk not just about how cool mindfulness is, and it's such a trend these days, and you guys should all meditate, and it's so great. I say some of that, but the other thing that I make sure and say is that mindfulness actually reduces psychological stress. It increases levels of alertness, focus, productivity, and makes you a happier, more productive professional. so that they see that connection, the WIFM, right away. So what can you do? Here's some things you can note down for your own project that you selected. One way of doing this is show your adult user in a believable manner that your design does at least one of two things for them, if not both. One, it solves or avoids a problem or inconvenience for them of some kind. It solves or avoids a problem or inconvenience for them, or it provides an opportunity for advancement or growth for them in some way. So either you're taking something out of their way, solving a problem or getting rid of an obstacle, or you're pushing them forward in some way. They have to know and trust and believe that what you're designing is doing that, one of them or both, right off the bat, or their hands going over the glass. That's readiness. Let's talk about experience. Another key principle in adult learning is that adult learners bring their own unique life experiences, prior knowledge, perhaps subject matter expertise, to any new learning situation. And in my role, this is something I've learned all too well. Sometimes the fact that adult learners bring this experience with them, bring this knowledge with them, it can facilitate learning, and it's great. Sometimes, just as with readiness though, it can inhibit learning. Because content can be received in any one of three different ways. Either content that a learner is receiving is going to go way over their head, because it's way beyond their realm of experience, in which case you're going to leave them overwhelmed. It's also possible that content is going to be way below their level of experience, and so they're not even going to be engaged or motivated. You create a feeling of boredom, disengagement, because it's way too basic. The third way that content can be received by a user is that it's contradictory. So this is the most interesting one from my perspective in learning and development, which is to say that an adult learner brings knowledge, expertise, things they've gained over the years that contradicts, at least in their mind, with what you're giving them. And that results in the, I know differently, so I know better. That's pretty much what you get from a lot of learners. And in either case, in either of those, or any of those three cases, I should say, you lose them. If it's going over their heads, if it's too basic for them, or if it at least appears to contradict, you lose them. And you don't want to do that. So here's what I do in my process. Draw them in. Lean on that experience. In fact, I often incorporate their experience into the content, and I welcome it. An example that I shared with my teammate Sarah regarding AppNexus University, which is our onboarding program, is around the fact that our new hires come from all kinds of different worlds. People come from ad tech, or, maybe 10, 15 years in ad tech. I don't know how old ad tech is. 10, 15 years in ad tech. Some come with absolutely no experience whatsoever. Some are partway in between. Some come from technology. Some are from finance. It's a whole really interesting mix of people. And so then, when you're onboarding these folks and want them to understand what AppNexus does, what our industry does, who our clients are, what do you do when you have that one person who clearly knows way more than you're ever going to know about ad tech? It's to leverage that. The key is to leverage that and not dismiss it or shy away from it or run away from it, but actually draw them in. Hey, tell me, what do you know? Let's talk about that. Help me draw them in, both as a facilitator in my case, but also to help drive that content. What can you add to this? Tell me what you know about this that will benefit all of us. In almost all cases, bringing in an adult user's experience and helping that shape the content is going to make them feel really engaged with it and committed to your content. The same is true of Should I'm a Manager, our management workshop. I stand up there for 2 days and tell people how to manage people. And there are people in the room who have managed at 7, 8, 9 different companies for 20 years. And in any design-centered world, if you were a designer-centered thinker, you might think, well, that's intimidating. I don't know anything. How am I going to get my content out there? But that shift away from designer-centered to user-centered helps you see that the user is given an opportunity to drive that for you and integrate their experience into what you're saying. And that way they don't see what you offer as contradictory, but rather just more material, more interesting stuff for everyone. So you might jot down there for your own design project, what are some ways you can actually draw in and incorporate multiple levels of experience in what you're designing. A little bit of a deeper dive into experience now. To expert versus novice learners, or expert versus novice users. It's not merely that your experts know more than the novices. It's not a question of quantity. It's a question of when you have an expert and a novice and they're both looking at something they've never seen before. New information, new learning, a new system. So it's equally new to both of them, but your expert and your novice are actually going to learn fundamentally differently. I'll give you a quick example that comes from my mom, actually, who is an amazing, amazing, amazing cook. And by the way, I don't just mean in the mom sense, the way all of our moms are amazing cooks. But she's actually, she should be professional. I really think so, because no matter what the cuisine is, she has this intuitive capability to create amazing, amazing things. Now, one day, of course, I called her and I was asking her for a recipe for a particular dish. And she said, oh, recipe, yeah, sure. So you're going to need tomatoes. I mean, tomatoes are the base. You're going to need some tamarind. Don't forget clarified butter for the garnish. And when you're boiling it, you got to use that special pot. You know that pot I use at home? That's like that one pot. If you don't use that one, you get kind of a different fragrance coming out of it. And then when you hear that fragrance, what you're going to know is that the raw smell, the raw tomato smell disappears. That's when you know to turn it off. You can always wait till the end to add salt, by the way. There's no rush for that. So cut to me, the novice, saying, so how many tomatoes? How much tamarind? How much salt? When am I turning it off? What is this raw smell you're talking? I have no idea. Do I need turmeric too? What's going on here? And if you had an expert, so not someone who knows that recipe, not even someone who knows anything about Indian cooking, but someone who's a professional chef, let's say, who just really knows a lot about those interactions and the chemistry of cooking, an expert. And if they'd had that same conversation with my mom, they're equally new to the recipe, but chances are they're going to be asking very different questions. Huh, very, very cool, tomatoes and tamarind. Can I do it with potatoes? Well, if I do it with potatoes, it takes a little bit longer to cook. Potatoes just take longer to cook. Is that going to interfere with the way the rest of the base is cooking? Does that mean I have to turn off the boil sooner? And if the base is tomatoes, if I pair it with brown rice, is that going to conflict? You see what I mean? The questions you get are going to be fundamentally different. And this is very important to know when you're designing, because you want to know who's coming to your design. What experience level are they bringing? If they're new to it, are they an expert or are they a novice? In driving, I'm sure you can all think back to when you were 16 and your first car and you're super excited. Oh my God, I get to drive and I can go to the mall by myself. Really fun life at 16. You know, a novice really needs everything spelled out, step by step, all of the context, all of the background, examples, use cases. So it's not enough to tell someone, oh, here's, just start the car and, you know, put on the accelerator and go. It's not quite enough. It's what direction and how long do I hold it and what do I do again? So every little piece needs to be explained. And this is because a novice does not yet know what they don't know. When you don't know what you don't know, then you don't know what questions to ask. This is a function of what I call metacognitive skills. Metacognitive, excuse me, refers to knowing how to learn. And a novice is missing some key metacognitive skills. They don't know how to navigate anything in their new learning environment. They don't know how to learn yet. An expert, though, who's been driving for a while, the thing with experts is the learning or the how to learn is now in their muscle memory. It's so much more instinctive. It's almost automatic. So an expert, you'll find, kind of like my mom, often don't know how they know what they know. They just know. It's so automatic. It's so in tune with who they are. So when an expert is explaining or designing, they often aren't in touch with the fact that novices can't process information the same way that they do. And so the thing to remember is that an expert knows how to learn. An expert knows what questions to ask. And so as a designer, one thing you can do is anticipate different kinds of questions when you're designing for novices. You're going to get questions at a much more basic level, much more step-by-step level than if you're designing for experts. You also have super experts, but enough said on that. Here is perhaps an engineering example that may help. Let's say you're designing something for users such that they can teach themselves Python, programming language Python. On one hand, you have your novice who's never written a line of code in their life. I mean, they barely use their computer for Facebook and Twitter, just have no idea how to do any of this. They're new to the world of programming. Then you have your expert, who's equally new to Python, never done Python before, but very well versed, very proficient in C++, JavaScript, a few other languages. And so you have these two kinds of users now interacting with the system that you've designed. As we said, the expert knows how to approach it. The expert knows what's relevant to them, what's useful to them, versus what's noise that they can kind of safely ignore or skip past. And when something's not working or not making sense to them, they know how to course correct to fix that. They know intuitively how to make connections with what they already know. Maybe it's computer science fundamentals that they can connect to. A novice is really not here at all. Novice is going, what's a development environment? How do I, what? What's commenting? What do you mean by clean syntax? I don't know any what this is. So in your design project example, the important thing to take away is figure out who's in your user base. Novice, expert, super expert, whoever it may be, but also in general, what experience might they bring to the table? What do they bring from their work life, professional life, maybe their personal life? What industries are they coming from? And what can they add to your content as a result? And of course, be prepared for a lot of questions. All right, let's move on to the third adult learning principle that I'll talk about today. And there are many others, as I said, but these are three of the most interesting. This one is autonomy. Autonomy is just what it sounds like, and it's not what you see up there. Poor George Michael Bluth there with his dad, Michael, learning how to drive. It's a rather unfortunate situation, not containing a lot of autonomy. In your design, I'm sure that you'll have to set some guidelines, parameters, and rules depending on what the nature of that design is, and that's fine. But adult learners actively want to participate in, contribute to, and drive any new learning situation. Truly, the more they contribute, the more they learn. And the more they learn, the more committed they are to it longer term. So here's something that I do, and I'll give you a Pro Series example. I will tell anyone who will listen, basically, anybody who will give me the time of day, I tell them all the time, no two Pro Series courses ever look the same. Meaning, if I teach presenting like a pro tomorrow, and then I teach it again a week later, it does not look the same. They've never looked the same. And that's because the participants really drive the course. As an example, in becoming a leader, sometimes the participants will really like our core values exercise, have a lot of questions about it, a lot of comments, and just want to keep going there. So that's what we do. In managing up, sometimes a participant brings so much experience or something, they have a lot of feedback, a lot of pushback, and there's discussion that happens around one of the concepts in managing up. That's what we do. That's not to say you give up all control. It's kind of like what Dr. Kolarek said earlier. It's not that you have no control over what you're designing or what you're delivering. The user doesn't dictate everything, but neither do I, because if I were there saying, well, this is the content, the fixed content that I'm going to deliver to you one way, and this is what we're going to do, that would be very designer-centered. And we want to instead have that balance where we say, what does the user need in this moment? What does this learner want to do, and how do they want to contribute? So from that perspective, what ends up being really helpful is that, yes, I control it as a facilitator, but ultimately I let my users drive. I give them autonomy in what they want to learn and how they want to learn. So what can you do? The first thing is just to treat your users as naturally creative, resourceful, capable people. They're adults. They're not children, they're adults. And so it's important to give them, when designing, the freedom to push back, to give feedback, to have their own innovative, independent ideas and ways of doing things. And the freedom to challenge you, frankly. Freedom to challenge you and your system and bring what they know and what they want to do. And also to respect them when they make mistakes. I think the worst thing you can probably do for an adult user is really that, is to coddle them or to talk down to them in some way, because it takes away some of that autonomy. Okay, with that said, let's go to step 3 of designing your user's learning experience. Remember again that our principles are being user-centered and performance-based. So in designing for your user, we'll cover 3 things: scope, format, and logistics. So whenever you are designing that product or that system, whatever you've written down, maybe it's a program for people at AppNexus, scope, format, and logistics all play pretty key roles. Scope. One of the biggest mistakes I think that designers make, any kind of designers make, is overstuffing with content. And I think one of the problems there is, well, what does overstuffing mean? I mean, well, whatever you think is enough is probably already too much. That's the key. And it comes from a well-intentioned place. It comes from a good place, which is the more the user gets to learn, the more the user gets exposure to, the more they get to experience, the better. But that's actually a myth. That's not true. Less is more. And that's a cliche, I know, but less truly is more when it comes to designing and figuring out what content do you want to put into something. Because information overload happens much sooner, much more quickly than you might think. And what happens when you don't follow the less is more is that you're no longer being performance-based. You're being content-based. You're saying, this is everything they got to know. And as I said, information overload happens very quickly, but also what you risk is something a little bit more subtle. You risk your user becoming a jack of all trades, master of none, as they say. You risk that superficial look at 15 things, none of which they go very deeply into. And in the case of some of your projects or the things that you design, maybe that's okay. But the way I see it, a deeper dive into fewer things so that there's a stronger, deeper connection to some things is much better for the long term. Much better for them to hold on to some key things rather than just get brief exposure to a bunch of things. So here's what I do when I'm designing workshops and courses, whether it's the Pro Series or team sessions, I boil it down to the key concepts. Now, what do I mean by key concepts? I mean the things that if my learners walked away knowing nothing but those, I would be okay with that. So what are those things? And that's what I teach, believe it or not. There's so much more in any of the programs that I do, so much more content that could be in there. But I boil it down to that, and I deep dive into those few things. And a fun fact here, often the Pro Series courses end up being maybe half, like 40% of what they originally used to be content-wise. You know, sometimes I'll design, and I'll fill the 2.5, 3 hours, whatever the length of my Pro Series course, and I'll be like, okay, this is going to take 3 hours. And then slowly, by the time it launches, I'm cutting, and I'm cutting, and I'm cutting, and I've boiled it down to, here are the key things they really need to know, and I spend the entire time on those key things, rather than just picking around at 50 other things. So what can you do? Cull extraneous information and leave what's truly essential. This, I think, though, is the designer's dilemma. What is truly essential? I mean, chances are that whatever project you've written down that you have to design in the coming months or year, chances are high that you possess a lot of knowledge about that particular area. Maybe you're passionate about it. And so when you bring both passion and knowledge to a design project, everything is essential. You love everything. You want your users to know everything. But it's not truly the case. If you get into that performance-based mindset rather than content-based, it begins to be easier to cut down that information. You start to think, not here's all the stuff they could know, but what do they really need to be able to do? What's really essential for them to accomplish after this experience? And just teach that. And by the way, it's not as though if you cut content that content is gone forever, especially in this culture at AppNexus with learning and teaching and a lot of knowledge sharing. There are plenty of other ways that you can deliver additional content after the fact or in other ways, such as one-on-one or in emails or in distributed information or on the wiki or in groups or however it is. You can really get back to the stuff that you weren't able to cover. So that's scope. Let's talk about format. You know, when people refer to the format of a program or a workshop or a system, often they use 3 words pretty interchangeably, and we're going to talk about those 3 words and why they're actually pretty different. Each one of these conveys a unique meaning: training, instruction, and education. Training, instruction, and education. People just throw them around a lot, but let's talk about what the distinctions are so that you can actually select the correct format when you're designing. So first we have training. Training is when you want your user to perform something specific and precise, sometimes on prompt or command, but not always. They have to perform something specific and precise. 0 errors, 0 variation. You're not looking for creativity and variation here. They have to do exactly that thing in that way. And over time, you want your user to increasingly be able to reproduce that behavior, again, with no errors, maybe with greater speed, until it's automatic. So some examples of training, and where training is the kind of design format that's useful, are things like, well, if you have to heat up something in a microwave or heat up something on an oven, use particular machines to do what you're doing, there are certain buttons that do certain things. And so if you're trying to achieve Y, the steps to do that are A, B, and C. This is not the place where you add your own flair to it. You just have to go start time, 1 minute, 30 seconds, and go. That's the only way to do it. There's no variation there. So machine systems come to mind where there's just a procedure you have to follow. Emergency procedures also come to mind, CPR, things like that. That's truly training, when there is a set way of doing something, and variation and creativity is going to screw the whole thing up. You have a set of steps that have to be done a certain way. So things like that, training is really going to be the best format, because your goal is like, do it in this way, maybe as fast as possible, maybe not, but certainly without errors. Some examples from AppNexus. You might look at Console, Jira, various systems we use. In Console, when we're talking to our clients about how to set up their campaign, how to go in there and put in certain fields, make certain settings adjustments, whatever they have to do, or view, change the view on there, look at some of their data, whatever it may be. There are just certain ways to do that in Console. This is not a like choose your own adventure thing. You train them on how to do that specific thing, and that doesn't change unless someone here at AppNexus goes in and changes the design. And so unless you're doing that at the back end, what they need to know doesn't change. It's exactly the same. Same with Jira. You know, when you go in and you want to know what drop-down menu to click to see customer requests, or you know, how to set up something in there, there's just a certain way to do it. So as I said, there's not much room for creativity here, and that's not a bad thing, because in certain circumstances, you want to train them to do something very, very specific and precise. The second kind of format that your design could take is instruction. So in instruction, your goal is for the user to generalize beyond the specifics and the precise information that's taught. You want them to generalize what they've learned and apply that to specific situations, to specific sets of conditions that present themselves. This is really about adaptive application. So over time, you want your user to be increasingly comfortable with adapting to new sets of conditions and customize whatever information they know to each unique use case. So some examples of this, the main thing that comes to my mind certainly is customer service, these sort of customer representatives, call centers, that kind of thing. Any position where, yeah, you have to master a certain set of things. You have to know this set of information, and maybe that piece is training. But what comes after that is, it depends on who's talking to you, who's calling you, who's coming up to you at the register, what question do they have, what's their situation, what are they mad about today. That's what's going to dictate how they apply what they know to that customer or to that situation. At AppNexus, a couple of examples, the recruiting team comes to mind. Recruiters, when they're talking to candidates on the phone or in person, there's an AppNexus pitch that you have. There are things like, oh, this is a great company, here's some data about the company, some stats, we have this many offices and this many people, and you know, it's founded in this year, and here's some information about our founders. There's a lot that goes into that pitch when you speak about the company. And it's great. There's a lot of great information in there, but it wouldn't really work if every recruiter said exactly the same thing to every candidate they speak to. It's about taking that information and then seeing, well, what candidate am I talking to today? Where are they coming from? How senior are they perhaps? What industry are they coming from? How interested are they in AppNexus? What are they going to want to hear in applying that? Console support or product support also comes to mind here at AppNexus. They do have to process tickets in their queue and respond to customer complaints or customer questions, but each one's going to depend on what that unique customer brings. So that's instruction. And finally, education. Education is that third kind of format that your design could take. Education, as you can imagine, carries both a broader and a deeper connotation. There's a long-term connotation to it. Basically, what you want is for your user to be transformed. You want transformation through building complex mental models, through building associative systems in the brain that really impact long-term behavior and values. The thing with education is that you want your user to change the way that they think. You're trying to change the way they think about something. And so in a perfect world, what that means is education can't be undone. You can't unlearn when it comes to education, at least in theory. You can't just forget it because it's become ingrained in you. It's part of your values, your mental models, your behavior. It changes your perception on things. So that's education. Of course, here at AppNexus, in my role in learning and development, a lot of what I do is education. It's funny, this is a little fun fact as well. It's kind of a misnomer to call what I do training, because now that we know what these actually mean, very little of what I do is like, do this over and over again and do that well. Very little, actually. Probably instruction and education, some combination of those is what I actually do. Because in my role, instruction is about, well, how do you take some of these concepts and apply them to who you're talking to, or who your teammate is, or who your manager is. And the education piece is about teaching things like confidence and empathy and other skills. Now, how can you use education in your own design? And not all of you are in learning and development and doing what I do, but even in your design, you can have an education component, which is to say, what do you want your users to think at the end of this? What do you want them to believe? What do you want them to be committed to at the end of it? One example is, we talked about Jira earlier, how you have to know what buttons to push and whatnot. But if a team works together and uses that same tool, Jira, in a slightly different way, which is to say, hey, you know what, we're going to create a team agreement around what is our customer response time, what's our ticket response time, what is our commitment level to customers, and why is that important? And even things like, what's our definition of done? How do we know when a ticket is done? And we're all going to stick to that, commit to that. Why is that valuable for us? And what does that say? How does that help us empower our customers? Those kinds of things, that's education. That's taking a set of fixed things, fixed content, like Jira, and finding a value around it, finding a commitment around it, finding something you can all agree on, finding team cohesion around it. That's something that you don't forget. That's something once you believe and commit to and you're exposed to, that's how you live. That's how you live and work every single day. So one thing you can note down for your own design project is, how do you decide what format your design is going to take? Maybe think about what the ultimate purpose is. Are you trying to train, instruct, or educate? And more often than not, it's going to be a combination. As I said, I instruct and educate. Many tools, Jira included, performance management tools, a lot of these things do multiple different things, and that's fine. But decide what the purpose is, decide that format, and reinforce that purpose in everything that you're doing. All right. Then I have logistics. Logistics. Logistics are important. I know, it may seem like, well, how much can they really matter? But they do matter. Where is your user when they're interacting with your content? What time of day is it? Who else is there? How long is the interaction? These things matter a lot more than you might think. So let me tell you what I do. I always think about, what message am I sending through my logistics? What message am I sending based on what day I choose that my workshop is going to be on? If I decide it's going to be on a Monday, the message I'm saying is, I don't care that you're coming back from the weekend and it's Monday morning and you have a ton of emails to catch up on and you're trying to set up your week. Come to my class. That's the message I'm sending. And if I do it, so that's, if I do it on Monday morning. If I do it on Friday afternoon, I'm sending the message of, again, I don't care that you're probably zoned out by now and basically in happy hour mode mentally. You're going to come to my class. And so it's always sending a message. Whatever decision you make around logistics sends that message. Same thing with where you choose to hold something, whether it's an event or if they're interacting with something you've designed on their laptop, where are they sitting? It all matters. In my work, when I decide to have a program in the Cube for 10 to 15 people versus Battleship with like 30 people, or here in the Razzle with 100 people, whatever it may be, you are sending a message around, how intimate is this environment going to be? I may be sending the message when I pick the Cube or Battleship that, hey, this is going to be pretty intimate. We're going to have a lot of interaction here. This is going to be a tiny little space for the people who really care about this. That's who we want here. If I choose a much larger space like the Razzle, it's sending a very different message. It's first of all setting expectations. Oh, we're going to get a lot of people. we are going to get a lot of people. The same talk had been in the queue, but it would have looked very, very different messaging-wise. We're expecting a lot of people. We're expecting this to be kind of a wide reach. The audience is going to be pretty broad. So just consider that every decision you make about logistics sends a message to your user. Even frequency, offering something once a week versus once a quarter, sends a message about level of demand or whatever it may be. So what can you do? Just don't fall into the trap of designer-centered thinking. Don't just create logistics that work for you only around your preferences or convenience. Think about what message are you sending to your users and see if you're okay with that message. All right. And finally, we'll wrap up with transform your user. I don't want to eat too much more into your lunch hour here. Transforming your user is step 4 of this process of designing your user's learning experience. Transforming your user is all about making it stick. And it's really about making your design exceptional. We talked about how the analyzing your user base, that discovery process, is understanding what's useful. When you know your adult user very well and cater to them, you're making your learning usable for them, and transformation is about making it exceptional. When your design enables learning to stick, it's truly exceptional. So I'll cover 2 quick things. One is distributed learning. Now, distributed learning, the colloquial way of referring to that is the spacing effect and the context variation effect. Distributed learning is one of the most powerful and reliable techniques in memory science, but it can apply to design as well. Let's talk about spacing first. One way to make your design exceptional and really make the learning stick, I use this in my design all the time, is rather than having all of the information, all of the content all at once in one go, spacing it apart in time. So there's a plethora of research coming out of psychology, out of neuroscience, to tell us that users learn at least as much, if not more, and they retain what they learn for much, much longer when they distribute or space apart their study or practice time or their interaction with your content. So all those nights you spent in college cramming overnight, doing the all-nighters for your finals and such. Anybody remember anything you learned? I don't know. I certainly don't. This isn't to say that cramming is totally useless, because it did clearly serve a purpose the next day. But what about after that next day? If you're looking at long-term reliability and long-term ability to access that learning afterwards, spacing is going to be much, much more effective for you. Cramming is a little bit like you're putting a lot of stuff into one of those cheap suitcases. Like, it does actually hold for a little while, surprisingly enough, and then everything falls out. And you don't want to do that. When you're designing, you want it to stick. And so spacing it apart in smaller chunks, rather than what our friend Sisyphus up here is trying to do, is going to be much better for you. I do this in the Pro Series. The overarching doctrine coming out of the Pro Series is around emotional intelligence. And sure, I could talk about emotional intelligence for an entire week, 10 hours a day, cram it down your throat there. But instead, emotional intelligence pops up in every single one of the courses in a small way. And thereby, it's reinforced in those smaller chunks over time. People see it after taking a course 4 weeks later, and then 6 weeks later, and then 4 weeks after that, and they hear it over and over and over again. And it sticks much better than if they heard it all at once and were trying to stuff it into a suitcase. The other part of distributed learning is context variation. It's very similar to spacing, except it doesn't have to do with time, it has to do with place. So conventional wisdom tells us when you're trying to study, practice, learn something, whatever it is, you're trying to interact with some information, like do it in one spot. Pick your quiet spot at work, at home, in the library, stay there, focus on that, no distraction, and just do that. But really, the truth of it is that we do need variation, and it's not because variation doesn't cause distraction, because it can. It's that distraction is actually really important for our brains. Every time we vary the context of where we are when we're interacting with information, what happens is our brain actually forms different cues. So there are external and internal cues that allow our brain to form new mental associations with that material. So if I'm exposed to something that you've designed here, standing here on the Razzle stage, and then I see it again at my desk and I see it again at home, there are different external and internal cues that are being triggered for that same information. My brain is making an association with, oh yeah, you saw this system or this information earlier when you were standing on the Razzle stage. That was pretty crazy, huh? In front of all these people. Whoa. And then saw it again at home. Oh yeah, at home I remember the refrigerator was kind of humming, the AC was going, it was kind of a little warm in there despite the AC, as it is in New York apartments. So those internal and external cues help the brain form new associations with that same material. And internal cues also matter. It's not just about what temperature is it in the room, or what's the light level, or is there any noise. Those are external cues. But there are also such thing as internal cues. So internal cues are about what mood is someone in when they're interacting with your material. Are they preoccupied? What's their perception? What are they thinking about? Even things like confidence and motivation levels play into internal cues. Oh yeah, I was really in a bad mood when I looked at this the last time. Or I was really freaking out about this one thing. I was distracted when I read it. Those things actually build associations rather than take away from them. So rather than what you might think, which is stay in one place and do it, varying that context and get as creative as you want actually helps the brain build associations and retain that learning a lot better. Last but not least is fun. This one's a freebie from me, so you're welcome. Fun. This is enjoyable, positive learning experiences. That's what we mean by fun. And it's not mere whimsy, by the way. You don't just want your learner or your user to have fun because they'll like you, or you want to get brownie points from them or something. That's not at all the case. And I'm sure that when you look at the program or product that you guys are going to design, you may not even know exactly who your users are. You may not really be interacting with them directly. So it's not about making them like you. There's a bigger purpose. Fun is about resonance. Fun is about resonance in that you want whatever a user is learning to resonate with them, impact their confidence, their motivation, their mood, and really feel engaged with it at a level deeper than, oh, I gotta learn this, I gotta do this right now. That's the purpose of fun. Changes in confidence, motivation, and mood directly impact overall commitment. So you're trying to go for resonance. I'll give you a quick example that I shared with the learning and development team just the other day in our team meeting, which is quite a nerdy example, but it's a fun one, which is back when I was in middle school, I was in a Spanish class, and for whatever reason, my teacher thought it was really, really important that we all memorize the countries and capitals of Central and South America. This was just considered critical to our learning experience. I thought, okay, let's do it. And instead of making us memorize it from a book, she set it to song. And I'm talking, like, this was a long time ago. I'm talking bad 90s rap backing track. The worst. And the best at the same time. And the thing is, music worked wonders for me. Music happens to be a tool that resonates very, very highly with me and helps my brain form those associations and helps me feel more committed. So this was amazing for me. So to this day, I have not been able to forget it. I mean, you shake me in my sleep, wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you say, Nicaragua, Managua, Managua, Nicaragua. And the song is it's so simple, but just the fact that music was the medium that was used resonated highly with me. And to this day, I have never forgotten it. But music is only one way. There are many, many different ways to introduce fun and resonance into your design. That involves an understanding of learning styles. You have to know, how does your user like to learn? What resonates with them? For me, it was music. Musical rhythmic happens to be one of the ways in which I learn. But if you have a visual learner, a verbal or linguistic learner, a kinesthetic learner, each one of these learners resonates with slightly different things. Maybe it's a colorful image, such as the one you see up here for visual learners. Maybe it's words or key phrases that will resonate with a verbal learner. Bodily and kinesthetic, they want to be able to touch something tangible. Interpersonal versus intrapersonal, it's are they learning with people or are they learning by themselves? There's even a naturalistic learner. This is the learner who likes to be out there, sometimes it's literally nature, but sometimes it's just out in the field where they can actually be there and interact in person. So you may not know exactly what kind of learner your user is, but that's okay. The takeaway for you is to have a mix in your design. A mix is key, because you may not be clued into how specifically someone wants to learn, but if you have a good mix of these, you're hitting huge parts of your user base that will then find resonance in what you're designing, not merely just something they have to do. All right. I'll conclude now with this thought. Once you've gone through all 4 steps of this user-centered, performance-based design process, Remember, we had analyze your user base, know your user base, design for that user, and transform them through that resonance. Once you go through all of that, you don't stop there. There's actually one more step, and that is to iterate. We are not designers if we do not constantly iterate on what we're doing and go back and revisit those steps to make sure we're up to date based on new information we've learned about our user or new sets of conditions, maybe changing priorities, whatever it may be. We want to always go back to that beginning. I do this all the time with the Pro Series or with Should I'm a Manager or any of the things that I design. We just go back and think, well, who's in my user base now? We've acquired several companies in the last year. That's a very different user base coming in. What do they want? What do they need? Let me go find out. Let me go out and learn. Similarly, I go back to knowing my user. Well, I know they're all still adults, but what do they need? What do they need to feel like they have autonomy? Are my exercises actually giving them that? Do they still feel ready to learn, or am I closing them off inadvertently without realizing it? I always go back and revisit this so that I'm staying up to date with that and really staying user-centered. So remember, it is to your advantage to do all of this and tap into user-centered, performance-based design, because what that does is it takes your design from something that's merely functional to something that's useful, usable, and exceptional. It takes it to that next level. So that brings me to the end of my time here. I'm sorry for going a little bit over. I know we started a bit late. So in lieu of a formal Q&A, I'll just be hanging out for a few minutes if anyone has questions here. And if anyone's on video or not in the New York office, you can ping or email me anytime, and I'm happy to make the time to chat more. My sincere gratitude again to the UX team for this amazing opportunity and providing this platform to share with all you guys. Thanks to BDoc and Adam too. And enjoy what promises to be an amazing rest of the day at this conference filled with learning and teaching. Thank you so much.
Give it up for Nitya, please. Give it up for Nitya.